everyone. So welcome to episode 2 of the Woke Mommy Chatter podcast for season 3. On this episode, we are digging deep and doing therapy, Black girl therapy. So we know Black women have had this strong Black woman trope, I guess you'd call it, for what seems like forever, to our detriment. You know, we are strong, we're indestructible, but we're also vulnerable, and we are just like everyone else. You know, we're not superhuman. And I think sometimes as mothers, we forget that. And definitely as Black women, that's not often acknowledged. As Black women, we are on the front lines of every struggle. Always and often not for ourselves. We're doing it for our men, we're doing it for our kids, but we're not doing it for ourselves. And so I wanted to do an episode focused on kind of self-care. And I reached out to 2 people who I know personally and who've kind of helped me along. So one of the people we're going to hear from is Marcia Hibbert. Marcia is a social worker and a psychotherapist, and she is also my informal sounding board for all things children related and life, I guess. And then the other person we're going to hear from is Taina Mayberry, who is just a super interesting person in her own right, and then just also very chill and has an amazing kind of aura about her that is just so calming and centered. She also happens to be a trained therapist and a social worker as well, which is probably why she has the aura that she does. Taina's also created an organization called The Most Nurtured, where she creates safe places for Black women to discuss mental health, to do self-care activities like yoga. And it's really interesting and exciting to see that take off. So if you are in the Toronto area, make sure to check out The Most Nurtured. I'll include links to Taina's webpage as well as Marcia Hibbert in the show notes and also on my blog.
Thank you both so much for joining. There's a lot of talk now about mental health and wellness and taking time out. But when we kind of dissect that a little bit and look at Black women, I guess the first question I ask is, do you think that there is a bit of a mental health crisis in the Black community, specifically with Black women? And then can you describe that a little bit? Because some people, I think the 3 of us talking, we kind of inherently know what we're talking about, but some people may not. So what do you see and what do you think are some of the issues?
Well, you know, I'm gonna just ask, when you're saying crisis, can you maybe describe a little bit more? Because like you said, we all have sort of an idea together about what that is, but is there something that sticks out or a thought that came with that question?
Yeah, like that's such a psychotherapy kind of way to start the whole thing, right?
Of course.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I jump to crisis because I guess that's my mode. Like I'm always on edge, kind of just waiting, right? But I feel like I think that I'll give you an example. Like I was at soccer today with my son, and there's only one other Black woman there, and I mean, and there was discussion around mental health, and it was just really interesting to hear what she had to say. And I thought, like, I wonder how many other Black women, and I know that there are tons of Black women who are dealing with issues of mental health, but we don't. I think that for mainstream society, if you want to say that, there's always been a bit of people have been cognizant about mental health. People have been going to therapy. I remember when what was that depression drug that came out that everybody was Prozac? Was it Prozac?
Right.
Yeah.
In the season 50?
Yeah, no, no. Like, I think it was Prozac and everyone was taking Prozac and it was like this whole thing, right? Whereas I don't think we had that same kind of level of awareness, level of participation in the idea of counseling in the Black community. And there really is a crisis. Like we know in the States, like our kids they're killing themselves and they're doing it here too. How do you feel about it?
When I think about Black women not accessing services, it definitely is a crisis. For me, mental health is, our emotions, how we react, how we respond, how we think based on the pressures of our life. As a Black woman, for myself, I mean, we're faced with so many struggles of racism every day, sexism every day, you know what I mean? And so for me to access help, it's almost like it's another thing to do, right? Like it's another thing to think about. Am I going to find somebody that is going to be the right therapist for me? This is me just thinking out loud, thinking about this question, right? So if like for myself, I do have a therapist that I work with. And, the one thing is that my therapist is not Black, right? So when I'm a Black woman thinking about my issues, I have to start thinking about other women and will they want to go to they might want to go to someone who's Black, but where do they find them, right? Like how do I even find the right service? How do I find the right person? So again, we have all these issues that people are facing every day, myself included, and you're scared to even access service because you don't even know where to get service. Another part of it is that you're saying there's kids that are out there struggling with issues. Is that right? Like they're hurting themselves or not getting the support. Is that what you were saying before?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I belong to a Black moms group, and you'll see periodically in there someone will post something about a nephew or a friend's child or just something, and it's not, I mean, this is anecdotal, but I think that if it follows the trend of every other issue that we have in our society, like we can make assumptions about mental health around not only women, but Black women, but our Black kids as well. And so we'll see, like every once in a while, you'll see someone post something about a child either hurting them, trying to kill themselves or harming themselves or whatever it is. And it just makes me think, like, I wonder, like, what's going on, what's happening, and why is it a matter of we're not kind of seeing the signs, we're not recognizing that there's something wrong and getting help, right?
Absolutely. So, well, to get back to what you were saying earlier about crises, just to also touch on that, for me, like, I'm a huge social determinants of health nerd. So that's about like looking at factors that lead to discrepancies in our health that are beyond biology. So beyond just like, oh, I have a good immune system and like I inherited it from like my father or whatever, but looking at factors around like socioeconomic status and education and employment and social support that lead to like differences in our health and mental health between different groups. And as a Black population, like we are one of those groups where it like mental health is harder for us due to a number of like factors and our history. And I think that, within this day and age, even though there's so many more resources for health and self-care, there's also a huge discrepancy in who it's accessible to and who it's being responsive to, especially not just like in terms of, oh, is it expensive or is it inexpensive, but like, does this resonate with me? And as Marcia was mentioning, like, is the person providing this care someone who I can actually feel safe with and someone who I will go back to? Right. And even when it comes to socioeconomic status, like that, there are links between that and our race. And my favorite quote that I always go back to is that if it's not accessible to the poor, it's neither radical nor revolutionary. And to me, that speaks to like a number of self-care practices that are out there that have a price tag attached to them. That's right. That are inaccessible to, a lot of groups. And that can include, a lot of racialized groups. or it's something that's really insulting, that's kind of marketed as this new age thing that has been used, especially by marginalized or racialized groups a lot, that's now being remarketed with a huge price tag attached to it, in a way where we don't even feel safe. Oh, sure. Recently, well, Sephora pulled it back, but Sephora had this witch starter kit that included sage in it. And that was a recent thing that got a lot of outcry, and they actually pulled it off their shelves pretty quickly after. I'm not sure whether it was because they felt morally bankrupt by doing it, or that they realized people wouldn't, it was going to hurt their dollar. But that most recently was something where a lot of Indigenous and racialized communities kind of allied together. At least this is what I saw through social media, saying, don't use this. This is not your place for self-care. Burning sage is not a thing that should be on Sephora shelves. And it was taken down pretty quickly. So those
I have a thought. Sorry, not to interrupt you, but I have a thought about what you were saying. People not accessing service, there's a lot of shame and guilt, right? When we think about mental health, we have a crisis or we have an issue, that means there's something wrong with you. People really think, there's something wrong with me if I go get therapy, or if I go to a group or a community or a circle or whatever, I'm going to look like a loser. So I think there's a lot of negative messages out there about what therapy is, and about who it's for, right? Again, you're right. It does come with a price tag. It is expensive. But people then value their worth to that. Well, you know what? I can't afford to pay $100. They're not going to listen to me anyway, and there's nothing wrong with me. I can just, wake up a little earlier, maybe do a devotion or something or whatever. I don't know what people do. Again, this I'm going to go see a therapist. Mental health equals crazy. So I think a lot of people are afraid of that. And there's so many stereotypes out there about Black women that are tied to that. Oh, they're emotionless. Some people say, or I don't know what people say these days, but there's so many things about the angry Black woman. I've heard that. And so she's angry. That's just, I don't know. I'm just thinking and kind of getting a little revved up here because, there's so much stuff that tells us that as a Black woman, there's something wrong with you. But at the same time, there's so much shame and guilt that's wrapped up in all that I can't go get help. Maybe. I don't know. I think about that for myself, really. When I look at my own life and me accessing services, I was embarrassed for a long time, even though I am in therapy, like a therapist. It was embarrassing. That means I'm crazy, and I didn't really tell anyone.
I find sometimes it's a lot easier to offer help than to internalize it myself. And it's a lot easier, at least for myself, to be that cheerleader for someone else. And cause it's a good thing. Supporting other people is a good thing. And just doing it, no one's going to be that was a bad thing you do. People will be like, wow, you're such a supportive friend. But no one notices that you're not supporting yourself. And it's not necessarily their job to notice. But I find that especially, in some situations, it's a nice distraction to do something good for other people instead of focus on what's missing for yourself.
Right. And we do that really well as Black women, I think, is that kind of support, taking care of other people, focusing on the external. Let's make the world right. We really do that. I do that, right?
I do that too.
That a lot.
Definitely.
And trying to, and you're right. It is a distraction from looking at yourself. But I think that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying, that it's a crisis, because when it becomes shocking, when a Black woman kind of cracks under the pressure, it's a shock, right? Because it's oh my god, I thought she was fine,
right? She's holding it together.
I thought she was strong.
She's holding it all down. What happened? Right? So I think that's what it is.
But again, that goes with the stereotypes that I'm thinking about too, right?
Yeah,
you're supposed to be strong.
So strong.
Shame on you for having feelings. Shame on you, right? And we take that
Yeah.
in. I do, certainly,
Absolutely. I think one of the, hardest parts is that like we need self-care when it's the hardest for us to access. And like on a good day, it's really easy to sit down and like look at like maybe I'm talking about myself, my gratitude journal, and like write down 3 things you appreciate about yourself today kind of thing. But when the days where it's hard, it's physically, emotionally hard to get out of bed and look at myself in the mirror, those are the days I need self-care the most.
Right.
And they're the least accessible to me, either financially, emotionally, physically. I want to leave the house. I don't have the emotions to deal with it, etc. And that's when it's the most important.
So what do you do? What do you do on those days?
Oh Lord, what do I do? If I'm smart about it, I realize that, and I don't try and do the whole like, okay, like, let me just push through this kind of thing. Like, I actually sit with the discomfort of knowing that I don't feel well right now. And that's where it kind of starts. 'Cause like the distractions and the just like going off, like just doing things as per usual, that those are just distractions when things aren't going well, at least for myself. And just at least being able to pause and just be like, you're not doing okay right now. Let's do something a little different and see if we can make a little change starting now.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I ask you a question? How did you get there? Because I think one of the things is that we kind of just do it. We don't really have awareness about it. So how did you develop the awareness is my question.
Oh God.
Do you know what I mean? To sit there and
absolutely.
say, I'm in this. How'd you do? That's an amazing ability. You're awesome.
Thank you. It's also not an ability I'm 100% perfected.
Nobody is. But I think it's beautiful that you can actually recognize it, because I think that might be missing for
absolutely
maybe some Black women and people as a whole. Really,
Yeah.
I wonder about that. What do you think?
I don't honestly, part of it has been, I think, growing older. Part of it is also for me, at least, is traveling. I've traveled to a lot of different countries. For months or weeks at a time, I've interacted with a number of different people. And part of it is like, for me, at least there were some issues I saw and I was like, oh, it's the situation. It's something else. When you travel, you bring yourself with you. So when you're like, oh, that was a problem in that environment because of that situation and that person, being able to travel and seeing certain situations or patterns of how I deal with things replicate made me be like, oh, this is a me thing. I need to do something about this. I don't have these excuses. I've been to like 20 plus countries. I've been to several different continents and it's still here. It's me. I am the common denominator of my situation. And being able to own that, which is again still a process that I am trying to figure out, but like I'm more in a place where I can deal with that discomfort. And that took decades, a few decades.
So I was going to ask about have you had a mental health epiphany? But I feel like you just, Taina, you just really
answered that. Yeah,
you just answered that. You did, like that was your epiphany, right? Like when you travel, if it's coming with you, like it's your problem, right?
Yeah.
Marsha, do you feel like you've had a mental health epiphany regarding how you live your life, particularly maybe like as a Black mother?
Yeah, that's exact. It's like you guys are reading my mind. That's exactly what I was thinking of, because I was like, how would I come into my own awareness about what's happening for me? And it's my kids. And the funny thing is I have these wonderful children that drive me bananas. And, I hear them sometimes, like I say everything that I feel, with my children, of course, respectfully and tastefully and at their level. And I started hearing my children telling other people, well, mommy's really tired. That's why she's cranky.
Yes.
And in that moment, when I hear my children telling strangers on the street, mommy, for example, my son said, mommy, I really think you need to get some sleep. So how about this? We'll take the baby into our room, and maybe daddy can go into another room and he can, cause
Holy
he
crap.
sounds like an accordion, right? So why don't you send him somewhere else, mommy? And then you can get a break. So that is when my aha moment came and said, I am not taking care of myself, that my children are now reflecting what I'm
Mm.
saying
Yeah.
Wow.
onto it. And so, I see it in myself when I'm, um, with my kids, and I can see it in myself when I'm not that listening person, or if I'm impatient or, rattly. And the kids will tell me, they'll indicate. So I'm lucky I have them because they're helping me out to take care of myself. Do I take care of
Mm.
myself? That's another question, but
It's a
Yeah.
certainly,
process.
certainly it's
Yeah.
a process for sure. Um, but I think a lot of like what you said too, Tina, is growth. Like I've grown,
Mm.
understanding myself better. I did do a lot of work in my own therapy and all that sort of stuff to become aware of those feelings and emotions.
Yeah.
So I can see myself a little bit, sometimes when I'm not doing so hot.
Mm.
Um, and then I take that time to connect with my friend. I have a really amazing friend who, is totally awesome. And I talk to them, or I just kind of go to, I don't know, watch Netflix or do something
Mm.
mindless for myself kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm. Hmm.
One of the things I wanted to talk about uh, that I think is unique to Black women, and I'm not sure, maybe
Mm.
it's with other cultures too, but I don't know. I can say
Hmm.
that definitely with Black women is that idea of culture and
Hmm.
and us kind of um, carrying the culture forward, remembering the
Mm.
history,
Hmm.
fighting the good fight, like all that stuff. I feel
Hmm.
like that is kind of placed on our shoulders.
Mm.
Do you see, like, what does that do to us? And
Okay.
how do you see it as it's one of those additional layers that contributes to our stress and anxiety and,
Yeah.
poor outcomes.
Certainly.
Mm.
Certainly. Yeah. Um, I don't know. I go back to what I mentioned before, the guilt and shame. I feel a lot of guilt
Mhm.
and shame when I'm not doing it well. Um, that is teaching or educating my kids about their culture or their history.
Mm.
I myself, I'm still learning my roots. I'm still learning about, my family as time goes on. And, there's a lot of pressure to have it right, to know,
Mm.
give a good impression. Um, I mean, our family, my parents were, from Jamaica, and there's a lot of foods and things like that, that I don't know how to make. And sometimes I feel
Mm.
terrible. I feel like, oh my
Mm.
goodness, I should have learned the mackerel by now.
Mm.
So, I feel terrible. So it does put a lot of pressure, and, it just adds to, I don't know, this this feeling that I need to get it right. I need
Yeah.
to have it
Yeah.
perfect.
In terms of carrying the culture forward, I definitely I find it interesting, especially in terms of for example, I have a friend who's well, I'm Haitian, my friend is also Haitian, and they got married to someone who is not Haitian, and they immediately after having a child were really intensely thinking about that and how to pass that down to their child.
Mm-hmm.
And it also made me think, because I do not have any any children, like what that means just to have a Haitian identity, especially in Toronto. I rarely run into other Haitians, but like I find especially here there is like a lot of curiosity about what it looks like people are like, oh, I've never met someone from Haiti, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I definitely do feel like I need to represent
Mm-hmm.
um as opposed to the other cities I've lived in where it's really not that unique to come across someone from my island or half of the island. It's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to be here and to feel like what that represents. I remember someone asking me last year, because I recently moved to the city a few years ago and had never been to Carabana, and someone said, oh, are you going, etc., and I was like, maybe, I don't know. if I want to watch, I don't know, I'm not a crowd person. And they said, no, I meant, are you going to be in it? Aren't you going to represent? And I was like, oh,
That's different.
oh goodness. I never thought of it because it's just not something, I'm just not that type of a person. But then I'm like, does that make me any less of a X, Y, and Z? And am I not like carrying the culture forward? And for me, that's what it looks like to me as someone who doesn't have children at this point. But like, what does it look like for me just to represent and show up for other people? And who am I letting down when I don't? Or am I?
Right.
Because most
but
people are
there's
like,
that whole
you're
feeling.
Yeah. Especially
there's
because
that
people are
whole
like,
pressure.
Yes. Especially when people are like, oh, you're the first Haitian I've ever met or something like that. Because
oh my goodness.
we're just not really in the city, I seem. So it's like, oh, you're the first I've come across. I'm like, oh, great.
There's a lot to live up to. There's so many things that you deal with when you're young that you don't know. You just walk through it, and then you kind of look back on it and you're like, oh my God. And you have such a different perspective when you look back on it when you're older. I have a friend who, I mean, we were very good friends. We went to we went to elementary school together. We went to high school together. We traveled together. And, so I do a lot of thinking and writing about race now. Right. And it bothers her because she says, she'll say things like, well, you never experienced racism. I'm like, well, you never lived my life.
That's
so
the best line.
That, right. But she thinks because we went to the same school and because we went to Europe together when we were 18, that she kind of has this insight, and we're close. We've always been close, right? Like that she's got this insight into my life, but I've realized that there was like a whole part of my life that I never shared with her, right? It was
absolutely,
and that was and I mean that was it. And so she never had a full picture. We didn't talk about it. And as a kid, you deal with things and you experience things. And there are things that we experienced together, even traveling, where we laughed about, in Italy, all the men thinking I was a prostitute because I was Black. Like we would laugh about that, right?
Wow.
We would just laugh.
I get it.
We just kind of walk through, it's funny, ha ha ha. But now I reflect back on it and I think, well, that was an opportunity to have a conversation, but I wasn't able to have that conversation with her at that age,
Not
at that
yet.
time. No.
Yeah.
I could now, but I couldn't then. Yeah.
That's interesting because my best friend who I was just mentioned not long ago, she and I were talking and we had also were reminiscing about when we had grown up and we both had gone to private school and she and I, like I was there, we're always there and she keeps she's telling me, we keep talking about all these experiences of racism that we had gone through. And so, I mean, she's from Persian descent and I'm from, West Indian. But she was noticing all that stuff at her age, young, like grade 5, grade 6 and stuff. And can you believe that only in the past couple of years we've talked about it, like really, really talked about it. And it's a hard conversation. It's a hard conversation to get into, at a young age, it's difficult. So, when I think about the work I do and my own children, I think about how our kids are facing it right now.
Yeah.
And how do we talk to them? How do we help them through those sorts of things?
Yeah.
Because it is so subtle. And sometimes we do just laugh it off, but it is so hard to talk about sometimes.
Yeah.
Because it is so delicate, so sensitive, and, it's your identity, it's like who you are. And to come to terms with how harsh and mean our world is. I think, as going back to your question in terms of the culture of the Black mother or the Black women, that's a part of our job too, is like you said, taking care of everybody and explaining and teaching and educating in a kind, soft way. And that's a big challenge because, I think about, my kids were coming home saying, Mommy, my skin is different or something like that the other day. I was like, oh God, here we go. So it, as a mother, a Black mother, having my kids go to a school where they are mostly around white children, it is such a delicate job for us and, other mothers, I mean, they have their own issues, but it's not the same. And
Yeah.
it's very stressful.
Yeah,
It's very
definitely.
stressful.
What I find really interesting that both of you have kind of talked about is the idea of just kind of laughing off the situation. Like when Kira, you were mentioning in Italy, like the person who thought you were a sex worker, or also Marsha, more recently, you just mentioned. Because I remember exploring with my own counselor just kind of the ways that we try and protect ourselves from situations, because there's the fight or flight, but also she said the more expanded version is fight, flight, freeze, or please.
That's right.
Just trying to please the person in the situation to just get through it.
Oh my
and
God.
that part of that is just laughing it off and being like, ha ha ha, it's fine, I'm good. Like trying to not get into the situation. And part of that, at least for me, is when you don't have the terminology, if you don't feel like you're safe, if you don't, if you know, even if you don't, know how to explain or navigate that situation, you know right now that you don't feel safe even like skating that subject. It's the laughing and just like, that's funny. Like, let's just get through this. This was a funny thing. Like, let's move on. And that's kind of the please side.
Oh my God.
And it comes out especially when we're in situations where we know we don't have an ally. Even if it's like, okay, I don't know enough about like racism and race and like how to talk about it in the terminology and things like white saviorism, white fragility, etc. But I don't know those things yet, and I additionally know you don't know those things yet, and I need at least at my core, I need to feel safe in this situation. So I'm just gonna laugh it off, and we're gonna like grab a mojito and talk about like some sort of neutral subject where we don't have to go back into this, because like I feel uncomfortable. So
that's very true.
What you just said is just so groundbreaking for me, because I feel like I spent a lot of my life in that phase, pleasing, right?
Yes.
And I think that we all do it, and I think, I mean, you're right. Like we do it to survive, because our world is not, we're surviving in a majority white space, right?
Right. But there's also something else to it, is that we have so many feelings about it. Right. So it's not, I don't know. I would take it. I'm trying to be very careful here, but I wouldn't want to take away from pleasing, but I would definitely put it as an avoidance kind of to the real underlying feeling that you have, that you can't even, it probably is related maybe, but you can't even broach it. It's that crazy.
So, absolutely. So, I myself
and there's
am
some
a very
unresolved
dismissive person. So
it's unresolved, really. Yeah, it's very tricky. I see it a lot. I do it a lot.
So what happens when? What happens when? So I was in that phase of pleasing, avoidance, whatever, and now I feel like I've broken out of that. I feel safer. I feel more confident in being able to articulate what some of these issues are. Right. So I can do that, but then it becomes another stress on you. It's a different type of, so the pleasing and the avoidance puts this internal kind of stress on you that maybe you don't really know is there, but it eats away at you.
Yes.
And then
it does.
Right. And then when you're free and you're able to talk about the issues and deal with some of the racism,
you're in reality
and microaggressions head on, you're in reality, and reality is a really scary place because you see all these issues.
Is it ever?
So how do you, I mean, the thing with me is like, I'm like up at night because I'm like, oh my God, the world's a horrible place, and how are my kids going to live in this? This is horrible. And I have to stick the headphones in my ear and listen to, something on Netflix just so I can fall asleep and turn my brain off. So how do you, how do you navigate that?
How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Wow. That, you know what? I don't even know. That's a tricky one. That's a really hard one, because I think that coming into the reality, though, I would say, or maybe we can think about, is our own mental health making sense for us. I think it's our ability now to our functioning, our understanding, our reactions, our emotions, everything, the pressures, we're really starting to make sense of it. It's no longer a joke. It's no longer unreality. It is reality. And that, I feel, speaks to our mental health to a certain degree in terms of we are real now. And we've done that. We've processed all that, and we are now coping crazily with all the real reality of it. But we have finally really functioning, if you really think about it. I don't know if that sounds crazy or anything, but we're here. So how do we deal with it? I don't know. I mean, how do we just keep developing those skills. We keep educating ourselves. We keep trying to reach out, like, to those community groups. We keep trying to speak to government legislation about all the issues and top down, try to keep sending messages out. That's how I think we can help to deal with the issues, and maybe that will help us at some level too, right? Yeah. I don't know. It's a hard one.
If you enjoy listening to the show, be sure to subscribe so you get automatic updates of new episodes every Tuesday. Don't forget to follow Woke Mommy Chatter on Twitter at @WokeMommy, on Instagram, and follow along on Facebook at Woke Mommy Chatter. If you'd like to get in touch, have feedback, ideas for the show, drop me a line at wokemommychatter@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening to Woke Mommy Chatter.